Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the House Appropriations Committee, Transportation and Environment Subcommittee hearing. Today we will hear from the PSC, the OPC, the Maryland Port Administration, and the Maryland Aviation Administration. We're going to go in that order, and we'll take PSC first. And if we could have our analyst, Slovakia Bajel, give us her presentation, and then we will have Commissioner Barve, our old friend, come forward with whoever you think should be there to answer questions. You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The operating budget for Public Service Commission decreases by $97.5 million or 42.4% to $132.3 million in fiscal 2027. This decrease is primarily associated with funding for rate credits in fiscal 27 being $100 million lower than in fiscal 26. $200 million was provided in fiscal 26 to provide residential electric customer bill credits. This was funded through alternative compliance payments revenue in Strategic Energy Investment Fund. Of the total $200 million, Chapter 626 of 2025 required half of the funds be distributed during a peak summer month and the other half during a peak winter month. First round of fiscal 26 bill credits were applied in either August or September, and the second round of the bill credits will be applied in February. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows the overview of PSC's spending. Excluding contingent funding for rate credits, PSC's fiscal 27 allowance totals $32.6 million. Personnel expenses total $26.1 million or 80% of the $32.6 million. Outside of personnel spending, the largest single item in fiscal 27 allowance is $1.9 million for outside subject matter experts and technical consultants. This is an increase of $1 million or 118.9% from fiscal 25 actual spending. Spending in this area can vary from year to year depending on the volume and types of cases that are heard by PSC. The budget of PSC also includes Maryland's cost associated with participation in Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Commission. Associated funding in fiscal 27 is $540,000. Exhibit 2 on page 4 is the proposed budget change chart. PSC's fiscal 2027 allowance decreases by $97.5 million or 42.4% compared to fiscal 26 working appropriation. Excluding the funding for rate credits, PSC's fiscal 27 allowance increases by $2.5 million or 8.3% compared to fiscal 27 working appropriation. The largest increase is for regular personnel expenditures, which increases by $2.6 million. On page 7, there is a discussion on the dedicated purpose account appropriation plan for use by PSC and administration bills. The fiscal 27 allowance of the DPA includes $82 million in special funds from ACP revenues in the SEIF, of which $15 million is allocated for PSC. The Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, as introduced, includes language defining the authorization and purpose of this funding. SEIF funds for PSC are to be used for grid enhancing and advanced transmission technologies, with $10 million to conduct research and $5 million to provide grants for utility companies to construct or modify transmission facilities. Senate Bill 386 and House Bill 897, as introduced, make changes to regulations associated with electricity transmission and distribution. The bill also authorizes PSC to provide performance-based incentives for the development and operation of advanced transmission technologies. The Department of Legislative Services recommends adoption of committee narrative requesting that PSC submit a report outlining the uses and planned uses of the $15 million from the dedicated purpose account. The fiscal 27 allowance for PSC includes $100 million for rate credits, contingent on enactment of legislation expanding the allowable uses of SEEF. Senate Bill 386 and House Bill 897 fulfill this requirement by authorizing for fiscal 27 ACP revenues of SEEF to be provided to award electric companies to be refunded or credited to residential customers for electric services as a one-time distribution. On page 6, we have the personnel data. The allowance authorizes 3 new regular positions that are associated with PSC's move from shared human resources to internal resources. Out of the 24 total department-wide vacancies as of December 31st, 2025, 7 positions have been vacant for more than 1 year. Due to recent vacancies being higher than the vacancies necessary to meet the budgeted turnover rate in fiscal 27, DLS recommends increasing turnover expectancy to 7.9%. This results in a reduction of approximately 705,000. Starting on page 7, key observation 1 discusses utility termination and arrearage. As shown in Exhibit 3, the residential prices for both electricity and natural gases has generally increased over the past 4 calendar years. The average price of electricity for residential customers in October 2025 was 22.3 cents per kilowatt hour, which is approximately 16.1% higher than October 2024. The residential prices for electricity in Maryland has grown faster than U.S. average during calendar 2025. PSC attributes the increase in utility prices to increases in supply, distribution, and transmission costs. Supply and transmission costs are based on the amount of generation available to meet the demand. Fewer generators and higher demand have contributed in the price increases. Of the 3 components, PSC only regulates the distribution prices. Natural gas prices are largely seasonal, with prices reaching their high point from late summer to early fall and declining during the winter months. At its seasonal high point in July 2025, the average price of natural gas delivered in Maryland was 25.86 per 1,000 cubic feet. Exhibit 4 on page 9 shows the total dollar amount of outstanding arrearages for residential utility customers began to increase significantly in June 2024, and this growth has continued into calendar 2025. In March 2025, a new high of $377.6 million was reached, which was $93.4 million than the previous highest value in calendar 2024. PSC notes that although it is difficult to point at the exact reason for this increase, sizable increases in standard offer service rates, which started in October 2023, could have led to arrearages increasing 6 to 8 months later. Total outstanding arrearages have decreased in October and November. We are asking PSC to comment if the recent decreases can be attributed to the bill credits that were applied in either August or September of 2025. The number of monthly utility terminations for select utilities are shown in Exhibit 5 on page 10. October 2025 had the highest number of utility terminations in a single month since at least calendar 2018. PSC notes that termination restrictions in summer and winter months might have led to higher terminations when the restrictions were lifted. PSC also notes that increasing utility rates have led to more customers falling behind in their bill payments, which has contributed to the growth of arrearages and terminations. DLS recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting that PSC submit 2 reports during fiscal 27 containing residential utility termination and arrearage data. Second key observation, starting on page 11, discusses complaints and enforcement against third-party energy suppliers. Exhibit 6 on page 12 shows the total percentage of all eligible utility customer accounts that are enrolled with third-party retail suppliers as of December 31st of each calendar year. Since calendar 2013, supplier enrollment has declined each year and was 5.5% as of October 2025. PSC uploads quarterly reports providing data on complaints against third-party retail energy suppliers on its website. However, quarterly reports for the first 2 quarters of fiscal 26 has not been published yet. PSC should discuss the reason for the delayed posting of the complaint data and any barriers of timely reporting. As shown in Exhibit 8 on page 14, PSC reported 193 complaints against third-party suppliers in calendar 2024 and 79 complaints filed in the first half of calendar 2025. The third key observation covers Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding for utilities. IIJA funding for electric grid resiliency is available through the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership, also known as GRIP program, which is administered by the U.S. Department of Energy. Awards from the first round of GRIP funding supported 58 projects across 44 states, including an award to Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative to fund the Transmission, Distribution, and Communications Resiliency Initiative. SMECO was awarded $32.5 million. The award also included $16.75 million cost share from SMECO. SMECO began receiving reimbursements for associated expenses in August 2025, and as of January 2026, SMECO has received a total of $1.4 million. In October 2024, $4.2 million through the second round of GRIP funding was announced, funding which support 46 projects in 47 states, including awards of $50 million to Baltimore Gas and Electric, $50 million to Potomac Edison Company, and $100 million to Exelon Joint Utilities for projects across 6 states. In October, Exelon Joint Utilities reported that the second round of GRIP funding had been terminated. However, Potomac Edison has reported that it was requested to submit additional data. Starting on page 17 is the operating budget recommended actions. Recommendation 1 reduces funding to increase the turnover expectancy to 7.9%. The second recommendation modifies language, making a portion of the appropriation in PSC contingent on expansion of allowable uses to more specifically identify the expanded use for which these funds are needed and better match the applicable legislation. The third one recommends adopting committee narrative requesting information on the use of funds transferred from the dedicated purpose account to PSC. Fourth recommendation on page 18 is to adopt a committee narrative requesting arrearage and termination data. That concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bujal. And Mr. Chair, would you like to come forward? We're ready for your response, and
yes,
we want to welcome you in this new role, and we really appreciate the fact that we have someone with such long experience being placed at the top of the chain here where we need him so desperately
well,
this year.
I miss this room. This is where the Democratic Caucus would meet and where I would often be at my most amusing, I think. So things that you can't say on the floor of the House. So in any case, thank you very much. I'm accompanied by Amanda Best, who is the Assistant Executive Secretary for the agency. We all work for her. And I'm also accompanied by Kathy Fuston and Nikki Wiggins, who are the dynamic duo of the PSC lobbying effort. So you will be seeing them for the most part, but I'm going to try and come down here as much as I can. Let me begin by saying that the governor really intends for the Public Service Commission to move quickly, to innovate, to really emphasize affordability and reliability, especially of our utility networks, especially electricity. And he also wants us to de-silo. He wants all of the agencies that are associated with energy, Maryland Energy Administration, the Maryland Department of the Environment, and of course our independent agency to work more closely so that we can solve the problems that are really plaguing not just the state of Maryland, but many of the states in the PJM footprint. And so let me come straight to the point. We thank DLS for their analysis, and to give you what I regard as the Cliff Notes version of this, we have a lot of open positions in our agency, and she basically is advising you to cut our budget by $700,000 to reflect the fact that there are a large number of vacancies still. I have only been chair now for about 32, 33 days, but I have to tell you, filling those vacancies so that we can fulfill the functions of our agency is my top priority. And so let me, by our reckoning, it's 23 open positions. I understand DLS feels it's 24, but, and I don't know what the difference there is, but fundamentally speaking, let me just tell you what we've been able to accomplish since the beginning of the year. We have hired 5 people. We have 4 people who are in the final review phase, a final offer review phase. We expect them to start working at the end of February and the beginning of March, so that's 9 people. We have 9 other people who are in the offer and interview phase. Of those 9, 4 are being interviewed and 5 are still in the DBM phase, HR DBM phase of posting. And then we have another 5 that are kind of moving through the HR process a little more slowly than any of us would want. I want to emphasize to you that it's my intention to staff up as quickly as possible, hopefully by sine die. It's my hope that we can start to fulfill some functions that are very important to the ratepayers of the state of Maryland. Specifically, we have a big problem with respect to PJM, the way the markets are structured. We believe the market design is not conducive to an efficient, competitive market, especially with respect to large load data centers and the issue of phantom load, which I'd be happy to get into in greater detail. But essentially, what I want is for the Maryland Public Service Commission to really have the same kind of staffing and firepower as, for example, the Pennsylvania Utility Commission. They have a number of regulatory economists and lawyers who specifically specialize on PJM and the interconnection process and the market rate design process. We have 2 very smart people currently involved. They're both engineers, and they're very good, but Maryland really needs to pick up its game here because, especially due to the phantom load issue, it's important for the ratepayers that we begin to get these competitive markets into proper oversight. Finally, I just want to say, I probably don't need to tell you this, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. As you know, we are a specially funded agency. We are not funded out of the state budget. If you zeroed us out, it would have no effect on the state budget fiscal situation. We are funded by a fee that is charged on utility bills that amounts to roughly 50 cents per year per ratepayer. So basically, for the ratepayers in the state of Maryland, it's roughly 4 to 5 cents every month. And that fee doesn't just fund the Public Service Commission, it also funds OPC, and there's a section of MDOT, the Department of Railroad Safety, that it funds as well. So it's a bargain. What can I say? We're a bargain. But I want to conclude by emphasizing that it's our, well, also just to double down on something else, when it comes to hiring people, for the last several years, it's been very difficult with the salary ranges that we have to offer. Many of these positions are compensated $20,000 more at FERC, at the District of Columbia Public Utility Commission. Lately, we have benefited, unfortunately, from the exodus of talent from the federal government, and we just hired one regulatory attorney who used to work for the EPA. He left under circumstances that are no discredit to him. Let me just put it that way. And this gives us a great opportunity. Now, we would like to bring back HR into our agency. We don't want to have to wait a long time to hire people. There have been since I think it was 2016 that we lost our internal human resources department, right? 2015, pardon me. And during that time, since then, there have been at least, we believe, 5 instances where we made an offer to an employee, the DBM didn't approve it in a timely fashion, and they went and found a job somewhere else, probably paying more money. So we really would like to bring this back into our domain so that we can start to staff up and defend the ratepayers of Maryland. So, Madam Chair, I think it's really brilliant that they have a brilliant person born on September 8th to chair this subcommittee, because, you know, people on September 8th are always brilliant. So in any case, yeah, I was born on September 8th. That's the joke. So in any case, thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any question about the budget or anything else at all that you and your committee members might be interested in.
Great. We appreciate you being here, and I'm just going to start off with one question, and then I'm going to turn it over to our acting vice chair, Delegate Spiegel. You mentioned, you know, Pennsylvania has, I think you said Pennsylvania has regulatory economists and lawyers, and we have what we have, but they have probably a better, broader level of personnel to address the challenges.
Right.
Are you asking for those positions in this budget, or planning for them?
Go ahead and.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. We have not asked for them explicitly. There are 3 pins that are in our budget request for the internal HR that we're seeking to move out of the DBM shared HR services model and restore our internal HR. We did have a similar conversation with the Senate last week, and we were pulling together some potential, I guess, supplemental pins that we would also be potentially helpful for us. And if that's helpful, we could also provide that to you as well.
You read my mind. Thank you. Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, congratulations again on the chairmanship. Always nice to see my predecessor in the District 17 House seat. And please don't hold it against me that my birthday is in July, not September. This is, of course, a budget hearing, but since you started to get into these issues of PJM and data centers and recognizing that the PSC regulates distribution prices but not supply prices, I still think for the benefit of the public, it would be helpful if you could just explain the PSC's understanding of why ratepayer utility bills have gone up so much, which is obviously of great concern to all of us. And then if you could also just expound a bit on your reference to phantom load.
Okay, thank you. Yes, when it comes to, especially, let's talk about electricity, but the same principles apply for other regulated monopoly utilities. There are 3 factors that comprise the cost of your electric bill. One is the price of the electrons, which is determined through an auction that we conduct every 90 days. Big national companies bid to sell you electricity, and we pick the lowest bidder. So that is a market function that really is outside of our purview to control. The second is distribution, and that would be the amount of money that BGE, Pepco, Smeco, all the utilities that you pay your utility bill to, that is determined by how much they build, what their spend is, and that's something that the governor and our commission really want to focus in on. I'm an accountant, and they want me to sharpen my pencils and fire up my Excel spreadsheets and really get under the hood of the finances of our utilities. And the third item is truly outside of the control of everybody, and that's the weather. And when you have a brutal winter or a brutal summer, you know, the amount of electricity, in the case of the winter, the number of therms of natural gas you use is going to go up, and it almost doesn't matter what the rate is. That is going to have a tremendous impact on your bills. But to talk about phantom load, so The PJM, which is the grid that we live in, for those of you who do not know, PJM encompasses 13 states in the District of Columbia. I'll just say 14 states for simplicity. It has 67 million ratepayers in it. We are the largest grid of that kind in the United States. And they run many auctions for electric supply, but one in particular is the capacity auction. And what they do is they say, we anticipate that these many data centers with this amount of load, in other words, electricity demand, are going to come online over the next 3-5 years, and tell us how much money we have to give you to be able to meet that capacity. The problem is nobody has a really good fix on the number of data centers. Let me give an example. Let's say I was not a commissioner, I was Kumar the hyperscaler, and I wanted to build one data center. How would I do that? I wouldn't just file an application in Pennsylvania or Maryland. I'd file an application in Maryland, in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in West Virginia. I might apply in 6 different states. And that's because I'm going to play the states off against one another, of course, for whatever the best deal is I could get. And ultimately, I'm only going to build one data center, but on the books, it sort of looks like 6 data centers. If we don't have a good grip on the actual load that is to be anticipated, you end up with a situation where an exaggerated demand is pushing up prices. And what's happened is both Governor Moore and Shapiro and many others asked for a temporary freeze on the upper limit because they couldn't let the rate go to $1,000 per, I think, megawatt day. I think that's the metric. So we, as you know, as you may have known, PJM has had a process to examine these issues, and so did the 14 governors and the White House, and they published some principles. And one of the principles that the White House 14 governor group came up with is the notion of only counting as a load a data center where there's a signed contractual agreement and ideally a down payment so that we don't have this exaggeration, because the worst thing would be for your constituents and our ratepayers to be paying higher prices for data centers that are really not ever going to be turned on. That's your tutorial on phantom load.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I have a few other questions, if I may. Sure. I was hoping that the PSC could give us a quick update on the status and impacts of the moratorium that was ordered on BGE on sending out new late payment notices, collecting overdue money, and terminating services for non-payment. My understanding is that moratorium is set to expire on February 28th. Mm-hmm. So sort of we're up against it. Is there a cliff that we're going to see when the moratorium ends? Do you all have any update on where that stands?
Well, this moratorium, first of all, typically utilities, for reasons of optics, don't turn people's electricity off in the wintertime or in the middle of heat waves. Usually the discontinuations occur in April, May, when the weather is nicer. But this particular situation was caused by the failure of the BGE call center. I don't know if you've probably read, especially those of you who live in the BGE area, you probably read about what a terrible job they had been doing. There were wait times as long as 150 minutes. They say they've gotten it down to, did they say 30 minutes, I think, which is still unacceptable. So we felt very strongly as a commission that we couldn't, that we had to implement this kind of a moratorium to give them an incentive to clean up their act, to hire the people they need to hire, to make sure that the force reduction that they're undertaking right now does not impact call center employees. And so we're monitoring this. We actually had a very contentious hearing at the Public Service Commission about a week and a half ago, I believe. And we finally were able to get them to a place where they would sit down. We got them to agree to sit down with our staff, with the People's Council, so that they at least were talking and using the same language, because what was happening was they were saying, okay, we've got 150 questions put to us by PSC staff and the People's Council. We don't want to answer them, and we've answered the guts of them, the important stuff, and our staff and the People's Council, said, no, that's not true. You have not answered the questions we need to have answered. And I let them know that they have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. They need to answer those questions. They need to work with our staff, and they need to fix their failed call center. And so that's why we have the moratorium. And if we have to extend it, certainly we're at liberty to do that if we feel that we have to in order to get this call center fixed.
Thank you. Turning to the issue of arrearages and complaints, there was some back and forth a little bit in DLS's analysis and PSC's response in terms of the causes of some increases in the numbers of arrearages and complaints. I'm wondering if PSC has any view on whether any of that increase is related to the drop-off in third-party suppliers.
I hadn't thought of it that way. It seems logical that it would be. It certainly seems logical, but I think I would have to go back to the ranch and have them look at the numbers. Understood.
And then in follow-up to your comment during your remarks about de-siloing the agencies, which I really appreciated, I wanted to ask about, my understanding is that recent legislation requires DNR, Department of Natural Resources, to run a power plant research program,
right,
which then PSC's activities are contingent upon.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how that power plant research program has been working and what impact it has or has not had on PSC's efforts to research power plants.
Yeah. First of all, they're a terrific agency. They're well led, and they are understaffed. It's an agency that was originally designed for a time where we had 4 or 5 power plant projects, and they would do the analysis from a resource standpoint of environment and other factors like that. They were not designed for an era where we can have like 78, I think the last count was 78 solar projects in the state of Maryland. They just aren't staffed up enough to do that. And unfortunately, it is becoming a bottleneck again, not because they're bad people, they're just horribly understaffed, and I would advocate for beefing them up so that we can get more cheap solar electrons onto the grid. The first, obviously the first step in our CPCN process, Certificate of Public Convenience and Need, one of the first steps is the report we get from PPRP. So this is becoming a bottleneck, and I thank you for asking the question because it's important for the ratepayers that we get these projects moving as expeditiously as we can.
Thank you for that answer. That's going to be helpful when we have our budget hearing for DNR as well. Thank you. Just a couple more quick questions, if I may, Madam Chair. Thank you for your indulgence. One of the things that I noticed in the budget proposal was that a line item for community solar generating systems allocated only $100,000, and a line item for analysis of offshore wind expansion options only allocated $1 million relative to the overall operating budget of the agency. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that's that size.
Well, let me just describe what that $100,000 is for a software consultant, I believe, who's redesigning our community solar portal so that if you are a developer who wants to build community solar, your first stop is to go to the internet portal. That's what that $100,000 is for. The $1 million is, I believe, required by law. We are required to do you know what, I'm going to leave it to the expert. Amanda is our wind person here, among other things.
Good afternoon, Delegate.
Good afternoon.
When the Power Act was passed back in 2023, there were additional budget allocations made so that if the commission, which we are still in the midst of implementing the Power Act, and the $1 million is for a consultant to assist us with implementing the Power Act.
Great, thank you. And then one last question about the $15 million that's allocated through the dedicated purpose account for research and grants to construct or modify transmission facilities. This $15 million is divided up into $10 million in research and $5 million in grants. I'm wondering if you all can discuss why that split was made the way it was, and if it's enough, especially in terms of grants, to incentivize utility companies to do things like replacing old transmission lines with new transmission line technology, which is more efficient, and whether that will really help move the needle on that.
Thank you, Delegate. The $15 million, we saw the language in the budget bill, and we've honestly been trying to find a bill that kind of gives us more direction than the budget bill itself. We're used to typically receiving additional funds via a bill that has explicit direction saying commission will do X, Y, and Z. We haven't seen that yet, and so to be honest, it's a little bit, we only have the guidance that's in the budget bill right now. And so it doesn't particularly seem like a lot of money to really give out grants or anything. We were hoping to get additional direction, but we could certainly take it back if that is, the intent of the General Assembly, and we could try and, come up with some things to do with it. It's just, we're usually not in this situation.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to follow up on that question from Delegate Siegel. Is the language, there's language in the budget bill for the 10 million and then again for the 5 million?
Correct.
And if I'm reading it correctly, tell me if this is it. 10 million to the Public Service Commission to conduct research into grid enhancing technology and advanced transmission technologies?
Correct.
And then the 5 million is to the Public Service Commission for the grants to utility companies to construct or modify transmission facilities that incorporate grid enhancing and advanced transmission technologies.
Correct.
Do you know where this language or these amounts of money dedicated came from?
No, that's what we've been looking to see is usually there is a corresponding bill that'll have those amounts in it. We have not seen that yet. And so right now it's just in the budget bill to our knowledge.
And no explanation that you know of from the administration?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So if those amounts were reallocated somewhere else, as far as you know, it wouldn't affect anything that you have plans for right now?
No, not to our knowledge.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. I just have two.
Okay.
In the document, it indicates that the Maryland residential prices have grown faster than anywhere else in the United States. Can you ask why? Can you answer why that might be?
Well, okay, let me begin by saying that I am having my staff look into this because we need to have a precise explanation, and so I will be able to have a more precise answer for you at a later date, so forgive me. But there are a few factors I think have to be taken into account for. I noticed they compared Maryland's electricity rates to the nation. That's not necessarily the best way to look at it because we are in the PJM interconnection, and really we should be compared to the 14 states in the PJM, in my opinion. I'm not saying we shouldn't be aware of where we stand in the whole nation, but I think that's the measure that we really need to focus on. And when I actually read that this morning, I somehow didn't notice it when I went to the Senate, I asked our staff to begin pulling together the analysis for where we are. As a general principle, Maryland is a state that is seen as being transmission constrained. We've always been an importer of electricity. I mean, for the entire time I was in government, Maryland imported roughly 40% of its electricity, and nobody seemed to really care about it until like 15 minutes ago. But the fact of the matter is we are a bit of a transmission constrained state, meaning we need, regardless of where it is, and I'm not going to prejudge any projects that are before us, because we have two very large projects that are going to potentially, that will be before us. But as a general rule, when you're importing electricity, you need to have lots of wires, which is unfortunate because wires can be expensive. So that's not a precise answer, but I will get you the answer.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know how we compare to Delaware, Pennsylvania, District of Columbia as well, because we're all right here together, and we're all facing pretty much the same weather patterns, et cetera. And
we all drink out of the same cup, in effect, because we're in this grid.
And, you know, of course, we all are getting from our residents, you know, just crazy numbers of the bills that are coming in. The other question that I had is there's a $100 million grant for one-time assistance to basically to refund some of our ratepayers or our ratepayers. Do you have an idea of what that approximate would be per household, I guess it would be?
You go ahead.
Good afternoon, Delegate. We do have the data for when we did it in the summer, and I think just for example, for the BGE service territory, it was about $42 per customer.
It doesn't really help when you have a $1,200 utility bill, but you know, I guess the effort is there. For the most part, Delegate Spiegel hit all of the highlights, I think, for this. But so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Going back to follow up on what Delegate Harrison discussed, and what you said earlier, which is the PSC has the control over the distribution portion of the bill.
Right.
Can you explain to the subcommittee exactly how that distribution portion works and why it is as high as it is right now?
Sure. Let me just very quickly describe, without turning this into a utility accounting tutorial, let me just quickly describe how utilities make their money, because it's kind of counterintuitive. I like to compare it in a way to movie theaters who don't make much of a profit on the ticket sales. They make their profit on the concessions, the candy bars, the popcorn, the drinks. And that's, you know, I think that's a little counterintuitive. The way utilities make their money is by building hard objects, building overhead transmission lines, building or replacing gas pipelines, building substations, purchasing transformers. What we do is we give them a rate of return on their investment, and we try to calibrate the rate of return to approximate what they would have to earn in order to go into the market and continue to borrow money or raise capital in the form of stock sales. And so when we do this with the rate cases, and we don't pick numbers out of thin air. We hire economists who analyze what the state of the market is at the current time and try to make some assumptions about the future. Also, what a reasonable rate of return on a stock for a utility would be. And generally speaking, it's a 50-50 thing. We assume that 50% of their capital is going to come from borrowing money in the market, and 50% roughly is going to come from selling stock and participating in the equity markets. And don't hold me to this precisely, but I think in our last rate case, we assumed that money was being borrowed at 3%, and the stock rate of return was generally around 9-ish%. So since it's a 50-50 thing, I think the rate of return we decided was in the 6%, little over 6%. That's how we calculate these things. This is how they make money. But to be clear, they don't make money selling electrons or natural gas molecules. That they're supposed to pass on to the customer without a markup. So if the price of natural gas goes up, which it has tended to do in the last 5 years, that's going to result in higher electricity bills because roughly 50% of the electrons coming out of your wall socket were generated by burning natural gas. So as those prices go up, your electricity bills will go up. But conversely, if the prices go down, that will lower the bid prices for electricity, and that will automatically show up in the ratepayers' bills without any other action by the Public Service Commission. So let me just say this. So the job of the Public Service Commission is to make sure that the utilities don't overspend. You can see that they have a big economic incentive to build the biggest substation, or to replace a transformer after 20 years rather than after 50 years. And we have to, we have to watch that like a hawk. And this is where, it's very useful to have the People's Council in our chambers. They always make the argument for a more conservative stance. Of course, the industry is on the other side. And as you do here in the legislature, you have to figure out who's more correct, and that's the way you work the balance. It's a very similar kind of reasoning process. It's not hard accounting mathematics. There's a lot of judgment that goes into that. But, as I said, I'm an accountant. I have a background in economic analysis and finance, and I think we're going to have to be very, very vigilant on behalf of the ratepayers of Maryland.
Thank you for that explanation. That's very helpful. You were able to boil things down as if you were talking to constituents, which I'm sure is from your long background.
Door knocking.
So, but the part of distribution that you mentioned, where they're building things, are you able, is the PSC able to effectively evaluate whether their capital plans are appropriate?
Yeah,
or more than appropriate?
Well, we have engineers who work for our agency, and one of our top advisors is an engineer who himself started at BG&E at the age of 17, and he's been unfortunately he's going to retire because he's been able to find places where he's identified overspending where we have to be careful. Oh, let me just, I have to explain this one little interesting nuance. If there's a pipeline and it has a leak and they repair it, they don't get their rate of return on that. We just let them, and let's say it costs them $10,000 to repair that leak, we allow them to recover $10,000. On the other hand, if they replace the pipeline, that's an investment, and that they will get a rate of return over, how many years do we usually do that? Is that 30? Is it 20? Usually 30. Usually 30. So obviously, from a pro-consumer point of view, it's ideal to repair things rather than to replace things.
So back to my question though,
Sure.
how do you, so you use your technical staff to evaluate whether or not they are appropriately making those decisions?
Yeah, the term is prudency, yeah.
And are we just seeing a lot more capital needs? And is that why the distribution charges have gone up so much?
So I have a theory about this, and so here I'm about to say, don't hold me to it, but I'm on camera. So, I mentioned those three factors that build up to your utility rates: the cost of the resource, the distribution, which we're talking about right now, and the weather. And usually one or two are unfavorable to the ratepayer, but it's very unusual for all three to be unfavorable as they have been this winter. And that creates a perfect storm of high cost. I think that, when we deregulated, and I see the chief staffer who wrote the Deregulation Act is sitting in the back of the room right now. We built up a system where I think we've had very moderate rates for a very long time. And so I believe, and I've talked to my predecessors who were commission chairs, there was a real, because the price of the fuel was pretty moderate, I think there was a desire to make the grid and the natural gas distribution network safer and more reliable, and that makes it more expensive. So I think that we have to really evaluate very aggressively what we're going to do in the future, because we have actually we already right now have a fairly reliable electric grid. The number of outages during this most recent Winter Storm Fern were, I mean, you want it to be zero. It wasn't zero, but it was pretty moderate, as these things go.
I noticed that. I was expecting a lot more. One last one from me, and then I'll turn it back over to my acting vice chair. You mentioned about the group of governors in the White House and how they suggested that we only count a load where there was a signed contract and a down payment.
Right.
What's the process for getting that implemented, and will it be implemented? Do you know?
Well, the implementer would be PJM. And very notably, in their SIFP process, and these acronyms, is critical info. Do you remember critical information for, you know what? It was their process to try to get the market design under control. They did not have that as a requirement for assessing load. I mean, I've spoken to some people at PJM, and I asked them, how do you get these estimates for data centers? And they say, well, we ask all our utilities, and they give us a list. And I got the distinct impression that they don't vet it any more than that. So it's a big difference of approach from the White House 14 Governors Group and PJM. But PJM is ultimately, PJM and FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they are the decision makers in this ultimately.
So hopefully the 14 governors in the White House will have some leverage or pressure to make them. I
mean, I would hope so. The president appoints the FERC commissioners.
Right. Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for a second bite at the apple. Since, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned deregulation a moment ago in talking about the factors that affect cost, I just wanted to follow up and ask the PSC's understanding or position on the degree to which ratepayer residential consumer choice versus lack of choice by the ratepayer also impacts costs among those other factors.
I'm sorry. You want to know what was that?
The position of the PSC in terms of, or the understanding of the PSC in terms of the degree to which consumer choice, ratepayer choice.
Well, we haven't done. I don't believe we've done that kind of an analysis unless we did it before I was chair. Do you remember us doing that sort of analysis? I don't think we've done that sort of an analysis, and I would hesitate to presuppose what my commissioners would feel about the topic. There is a lot of literature, about this very question. There are some people who argue, economists who argue, that consumer choice hasn't yielded the kind of savings that most people think they do. I don't want to say that because I don't know. We haven't done the analysis here in Maryland, but people want choice, and my understanding is that there are some bills in this legislative term to perhaps tweak SB 1, and if that's the case, please use my agency as a think tank to figure out how to do it in a careful way. I guess that's all I can really say about that. I will say this, though. If you want to save electricity, hardly anything beats community solar. I mean, a lot of those customers are seeing a 10% reduction in their electric rates because community solar, and especially utility scale solar, is probably one of the cheapest ways to generate electricity during the daytime.
During the daytime. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions by anyone? All right, thank you very much. It was very insightful, and there's a few things that we will follow up on that we
Sure.
talked about.
Well, Madam Chair, always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
My birthday twin.
Oh, that's right. September.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will move on to, I'm much younger, though. We have witnesses that would like to testify. We have John Fiastro, and we have Amanda Best. Amanda was just up here, so it's just John Fiastro.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Ordinarily, I'm here on behalf of a client, but here I'm just a citizen. I just want to give some perspective to the committee. A few members are new to the subcommittee this session. That our Public Service Commission has 178 positions, and that's in stark contrast to some of our peer states within the region. The chair was good enough to mention that there are 14 states within PJM, but look north, look south. Pennsylvania has about 500 positions with their Public Service Commission. Virginia has 750. So our commission does punch above its weight. And I did look in reviewing the agency, the agency's analysis and recommendations at the 704,000 cut. And, you know, the budget assumes a higher vacancy rate. The chair has just said he's looking to fill those positions. While it's not necessarily a cut to overall positions, that cut does remove his flexibility to fill, and that's a problem. Functionally, it can limit the commission's ability to keep up with cases, do their appropriate infrastructural reviews, and protect consumers. So the Public Service Commission is getting more responsibility and more complex issues every year. And I would urge caution about the normalization of that vacancy and the adoption of that cut. So with that, Madam Chair, I appreciate the time and thank you.
We appreciate that caution and we share that concern. So thank you for taking the time to testify. Is there anyone else here for the PSC? Okay, seeing no one, we will move on to the Office of People's Counsel, and Ms. Bougel will begin with the analysis. And I believe we have Mr. Lapp here from the People's Counsel who can come forward at will. Go ahead, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The operating budget for Office of People's Counsel increases by $150,000 or 1.8% in fiscal 27 to a total of $8.4 million. Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows the overview of agency spending. $4.5 million or 54% of the budget is directed for personnel expenses. The second largest chunk is for outside legal services support, which totals $3.4 million or 40% of the budget. Exhibit 2 on page 3 is the proposed budget change chart. As mentioned earlier, the budget for OPC increases by $150,000 in fiscal 27. The largest change is in personnel expenses, which increases by about $127,000, primarily due to increase in employee and retiree health insurance. There is also an increase of around $75,000 associated with outside legal services support. On page 4, we have the personnel data. 28 positions are authorized in fiscal 27, which is unchanged from fiscal 26. Of the total 28 positions as of December 2025, 1 position was vacant. Moving on to the first key observation, we have a discussion on OPC's workload. As shown in Exhibit 3 on page 5, OPC participated in 226 cases in fiscal 25. Of the total cases, 149 favorable decisions were issued. Although OPC case participation rate decreased in fiscal 2025, OPC workload has generally increased in recent years. Compared to fiscal 2021, the number of cases that OPC participated in increased by 35.3% in fiscal 2025. In addition to growing case participation rate, the complexities of the proceedings in which OPC participates in has also increased in recent years. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the number of calls made to OPC for assistance. In fiscal 2025, 2,833 calls were made to OPC, which is an increase of 46.3%. This is the highest number of calls since at least 2009. According to OPC, this increase is primarily associated with the increasing utility rates. GLS is asking OPC to discuss whether it has continued to experience increased call volume in fiscal 26 and the impact of the cold weather on the number of calls. On page 8, we have the operating budget recommended actions. GLS recommends concurring with the governor. That concludes my presentation, and I'll take any question you may have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lapp.
Good afternoon, Chair Watson and members of the committee. David Lapp for the Office of People's Counsel. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm here with Carissa Ralbowski, our Chief Operating Officer. We appreciate Ms. Bugel's report, and we concur with that and the governor's allowance. I wanted to quickly share a few highlights of the impact of our office. We estimate that we have saved customers $800 million over the last 5 years, about $20 million for each million of our FY25 budget. But that number we think is quite conservative. Our existence and our advocacy is a significant deterrent of work our work has a significant deterrent effect that can not really be estimated or calculated. We also do a lot of advocacy that is not directly cost related, but is service related, such as the call center that you heard about and service reliability, other issues. We're also engaged in a lot of litigation that is longer term. An example of that is the capacity market from years before anyone ever heard of the capacity market. In 2022, we challenged the results of the capacity market auction and a mistake there. And that went up on 2 separate federal court appeals, the second of which was the outcome was in January, just a few weeks ago. And we succeeded in a case, Maryland OPC versus FERC. And that's a case involving $180 million in a mistake in the auction that year, and that is the amount that we're seeking in customer refunds, $180 million. We have to go back to FERC and relitigate that, but we vindicated very important customer refund rights under the Federal Power Act. We have a number of other complaints at FERC and in different places and in the courts. And these cases take a long time. That case I just referred to is 4 years and going. So some of our work takes a while and takes significant resources. Our work is complex, it's challenging, and it's growing significantly every year. Our staff, like the PSC staff, are specialized and underpaid. Chair Barve said 20,000. I think that is a conservative estimate of the comparison of what our folks can make in the private sector or even at other regulatory agencies other than Maryland. We have had lots of legislation in recent years that have significantly increased our workload. Just from last session alone, we have 7 new really long-term PSC dockets. And then we have added work to dockets that were already in existence. And we have a number of other dockets that are open pursuant to legislation in the preceding years. Rising energy bills and affordability issues are also driving up demands in our office. We have a small consumer assistance unit. Mostly we're about advocating before regulatory agencies, the PSC and federal regulators and at PJM. But we have a consumer assistance unit that takes calls and helps consumers deal with issues with payments and other issues with their utilities. And our call volume has significantly increased. We did add a new staff person to help with those efforts in the last year. But our call volume increased by about 50% in fiscal year 2025. On our budget, unlike the PSC, our cap under the statute was not increased in 2024. Our workload sort of rises with the PSC's workload, so our cap, at least theoretically, should increase at the same time as the PSC's. And we also engage in significant PJM and FERC work that is on top of the state work. And that work is really demanding a lot more resources. The average electric customer in Maryland pays about 60% of their bill is through PJM-related costs. We are actually a member, the state consumer advocate offices, us, 12 other states plus DC. We are members of PJM. We each have a vote. Our votes do not carry a ton of weight because there are more than our 14 votes, and there are more than 1,000 voting members at PJM. But we participate in hundreds of PJM meetings a year. I think today is one of the few days where there's not like a long stakeholder meeting at PJM because of the holiday, but we are very involved there. Our consultant rates are up. We rely on technical consultants to present evidence in cases at the commission or at FERC and in different forums, and those rates are significantly up. An example is we have a Washington Gas rate case ongoing right now. We had a Washington Gas rate case about 2 years ago, and our consultant fees, we have to put on 5 different witnesses, were about $150,000 a couple years ago. This time they came in at $300,000. So we're negotiating that down a little bit, but the consultant rates have grown extensively. I'd be really happy to address some of the questions that have come up, you know, on why bills are rising and that sort of thing. But I'll end here for the moment and be available for any questions. I did want to give a shout out to our staff. We have a very committed, passionate staff who work really, really hard, put in some long hours, and really care about advocating for residential customers in Maryland. The other thing that I'll add is we are very supportive of the PSC being well-resourced as well. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Let me just follow up directly on that point before we get to the rest of the questions. We just had the gentleman tell us how few positions we have in Maryland compared to other states. Would we need to increase the cap in order to fund, let's say, another 100 positions?
At the PSC, probably so, although the cap increase that they received a couple years ago was pretty substantial. So I think they have a lot of headroom.
They have more room than you do.
Yeah, much more room
Right.
than we do. So I don't know, and you know, it changes because the cap is relative to the utility revenues. So it's a
Exactly.
little bit of a moving target. So I'm actually.
In your case, one of our concerns is that you're under-resourced. And we want to be sure that you have asked for those positions that you need. And we would like to have some understanding of how close to the cap that has not been raised for you is the OPC.
We are about $1 million under the cap right now. Of course, DBM doesn't want to allow for new pins or let anyone get too close to that cap because they don't want to go over it. So we're probably almost where we are, where DBM is unlikely to allow new pins unless like the revenues go up and that headroom increases. We are certainly in need of resources. We are also respectful of, you know, the fact that the state budget is tight, even though we are specially funded, and we certainly think that ratepayers get a huge value out of investment in our office. Certainly, I would be neglecting my responsibility and my staff if I didn't acknowledge that we are really significantly under-resourced, especially in rate cases where utilities are, they have one case. We are spread out across multiple cases, and it's a real challenge.
We know, and to you and your staff, we know how valuable your services are to the people, the citizens in Maryland, individually and collectively, and we really appreciate the hard work of you and your staff. When you say, when we ask you about resources, you heard us talk with the PSC about getting sort of a supplemental report or information about in an ideal world, in facing what we are facing right now in the utility world in Maryland, what else do you need in order to provide the mission that you are, what's the word I want to say? The mission you are entrusted with to serve the people of Maryland and help us through this particular. What else do you need? And what is the rationale for that? If we could have something similar to what the PSC is providing to us, that would be helpful. And did the Senate ask you for that? Have you had your Senate hearing?
We did have our Senate hearing. No, the Senate did not ask for that, and certainly we'd be happy to provide that.
And we would be happy to share it with the Senate. Do we have questions? Delegate Harrison.
I just have one question. One of the points that really stuck out at me during the audit finding, it says that the OPC awarded consulting contracts to vendors that were not registered or not in good standing without the required approval and publishing the solicitation. Can you address that, please? I mean, why would we award a contract to someone who's not in good standing with the state?
I can take that. Good afternoon, Delegate. For the most part, that was instances where we had vendors that we've been working with for a long time, and they had gone out of good standing. They hadn't renewed their standing with the state, and we didn't have a good process in place that every time we were awarding a new contract, we were regularly checking to make sure that they had renewed their standing with the state. And so at this point, we've completely revamped all of our procurement processes. And one of those is that every time we're putting out an RFP or any sort of solicitation for services and we see who has applied for those, we check that they're in good standing right away. We actually have a number of instances since we've implemented this where we wanted to award somebody a contract and then found that they were not in good standing. So we're training our consultants and our vendors to make sure that they're up, especially a lot of the vendors that we use don't just work in the state of Maryland because they might be advising people all over the country because of the nature of their expertise.
So then you are actually going out and competitively bidding these contracts and not just sole sourced?
Correct. In as many instances as we can. Oftentimes, because of the nature of litigation, we have to move very quickly, and so we may not be able to do competitive, but whenever we can, we try to do competitive sourcing for these.
Okay, thanks.
And I would add that our contract, when we do like a sole source, it's reviewed by the Attorney General's office. And I believe that the not in good standing sometimes is just they haven't kept up their filing requirements with SDAT.
Correct.
So it's a problem, but we've corrected that problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, let me say, as a regulatory litigator, I sympathize with your earlier comments about, not being able to predict the varied year-to-year litigation demands of the office, and having to do a lot with less. We appreciate that. I was also going to ask about procurement and sole source, but you've already answered that question. But I did want to ask you also about some of the statistics regarding resolving calls for service and just kind of digging into some of that data a little bit, because the number of calls has obviously gone up as members of the public are concerned about everything from the cost of utilities to how they're regulated. And you track calls and record them as resolved, including when they are referred to another agency, right? So, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So there could be many situations, and probably are, where you're recording a call from a complainant as resolved on your end because you referred them to another agency, but after that handoff, you don't always know what happened to their complaint. Is that right?
I think that would be accurate. I mean, we of course do our best to point them in a direction where they're going to get actual help, but we don't have funds ourselves, for example, to help somebody pay their bill. But there are alternatives out there, and generally we will sort of try and diagnose the issue and point them to somewhere that they can actually get help.
Totally understand, not suggesting it's your job to always resolve their complaints.
Yeah.
There are complaints that really belong in other agencies that I'm sure come to you because you are so public-facing in the work that you all do. I'm just trying to understand the data in context, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do you have any other questions? I think you are, your hearing is now complete. If you would get us that information, if we have any follow-up questions, we will be sure and send them to you. And thank you again, and thank your staff again for all of the hard work that you do on behalf of Marylanders.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have nobody signed up to testify with OPC, so we are now moving on to the Maryland Port Administration, and we have Mr. Samuel Quist here from DLS, who will provide the DLS analysis, and our MDOT secretary and staff can come forward at whatever time you'd like to provide the response.
Thank you. This is the DLS analysis for the Maryland Port Administration. Page 1 shows the fiscal 27 operating budget decreases by 1.8 million or 3% to 58.5 million. Page 2 shows that the capital budget summary for fiscal 27 decreases by 87.2 million or 20.5% to 339 million. Turning to the performance analysis section, Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows data on total foreign cargo handled at the port. You can see here this chart is showing a high point in fiscal 2023, followed by a decrease in fiscal 2024 as a result of the impacts of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, which temporarily closed the shipping channels into the port that year. However, in fiscal 2025, you can see that the cargo volumes are projected to increase and exceed fiscal 2024 levels. I'm going to turn to page 7, Exhibit 3. This chart is showing general cargo tonnage data handled. You can see there's a similar trend there with a high point in fiscal 23, decline in 2024 due to the impacts of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, and then an increase in 2025. You can see this chart breaks down cargo into different categories. There was some variation depending on the different cargo types. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows data on cruise ship operations at the port. You can see in the middle of the chart here during the pandemic, there were no cruises operating out of the port for over a year. And then there was a smaller decrease in fiscal 2024, again, impacted by the Key Bridge collapse. However, in 2025, the cruise ship numbers increased once again. Exhibit 5 on page 9 is showing average truck turn times at the Seagirt Marine Terminal. This is a measure of the efficiency in operations. Goal is keeping these at below 60 minutes. In fiscal 2025, the metric was at 51 minutes, which was the 4th year in a row that the turn times were below the goal. Turning to Exhibit 6 on page 11, the overview of fiscal 27 spending. You can see here that 41% of the budget is for personnel. Additional 27% of the budget is for contracted security personnel. These include personnel who are responsible for controlling access for the entry and exit into the terminals, as well as agreements with the Maryland Transportation Authority police who provide law enforcement functions. On pages 12 and 13, on page 12, Exhibit 7 is the proposed budget change chart. The major components to the $1.8 million decrease in the operating budget are due to one-time spending in fiscal 26. The largest decrease is $1 million, which was a one-time grant to Sail Baltimore for dredging in the Baltimore Harbor that was added to the fiscal 26 budget. There was also a $681,000 deficiency appropriation in this year's budget bill for fiscal '26 for software licensing costs. And then the other decrease in the operating budget was loan repayments for an energy performance contract, which concluded in fiscal 2026. Personnel expenses are projected to decrease by around $619,000 due to the transfer of 11 positions out of MPA to the Secretary's office as part of an agency-wide consolidation of IT-related positions. These decreases more than offset the largest increases in operating costs, increases of about $580,000 to utilities expenses. On page 13, Exhibit 8 is showing data on MPA net operating revenues in fiscal '27. Operating revenues were projected to slightly exceed $55 million. The bottom of page 13 shows an overview of personnel data. The fiscal '27 budget includes funding for a total of 209 regular and contractual personnel, which is a decrease of 11 positions, which I mentioned earlier. Turning to discussion of the MPA capital budget, Exhibit 9 on page 15 shows 6-year programmed capital spending by investment category. This chart shows that over the 6-year capital period, 63% of spending is for projects which are related to system preservation needs. Exhibit 10 on pages 16 and 17 show a listing of the individual projects in the fiscal '27 capital budget for MPA. You can see here that the largest project funding is for the Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island Ecosystem Restoration Project at about $146 million of the total. Then Exhibit 11 on page 18 is showing the capital cash flow changes between the '26 budget as introduced, the '26 working appropriation, and the '27 allowance. Exhibit 12 on the next page outlines the changes in projects between the fiscal '26 budget as introduced and the '26 working appropriation, which was a net increase of $95.1 million. The largest increase was to the Howard Street Tunnel project of $122 million, and the largest decrease was to the Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island Ecosystem Restoration Project due to funding being moved to fiscal '27 for that project. Subsequently, on Exhibit 13, on page 20 and 21, you can see that the Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island Ecosystem Restoration Project funding increases by $135.5 million. The Howard Street Tunnel project decreases by about $233 million based on the funding needs for that project as it nears its completion. On page 22, Exhibit 14 shows data on first year and ongoing programming spending. This chart is showing that in the fiscal '27 budget, about 11% of the budget is for first year projects and 89% of the budget is for ongoing projects. And Exhibit 15 on page 23 is breaking out a list of the projects receiving first year construction and design funding in fiscal '26 and '27. Turning to the issues section of the analysis, this section of the analysis discusses some MPA federal grant funding in greater detail. The 2025 Joint Chairman's report requested that MPA provide several reports on federal grant funding. This first section of the discussion on page 24 talks about the grant funding awarded under the Clean Ports Program, which totaled approximately $147 million for the deployment of zero-emission technology and air quality improvement. The reports discussed that as of December 2025, MPA had received approximately $585,000 in dispersed federal funds under those grants, with additional reimbursements anticipated as additional procurements progress. On page 25 and 26, Exhibit 16 presents a list of total discretionary federal grants awarded to MPA between federal fiscal 21 and 25. In total, these grants are approximately $210.6 million. There are 2 grants that have been applied to that our applications are currently pending, which are about $28.8 million. Then on the bottom of page 26 and page 27, this lists 4 additional federal grants in addition to the 2 Clean Ports grant, which there are currently federal grant agreements in place, and discusses the status of the receipt of federal reimbursement under those grants. These include the Howard Street Tunnel Project, the BUILD program for the Dundalk Marine Terminal Resiliency and Flood Mitigation Project, and 2 grants for cybersecurity projects under the Port Security Grant Program. On the bottom of page 27, DLS is requesting that MPA provide an update to the committees on any significant changes to the amount of federal reimbursements that have been received to date from these grants, as well if there has been any factors that have delayed the federal reimbursement process or the execution of grant agreements for other grants that it has been awarded. Turning to the DLS recommended actions on pages 28 and 29, DLS is recommending 2 pieces of committee narrative. The first is continuing quarterly reporting on the status of the Howard Street Tunnel Project. The second recommended narrative is to request two reports on federal fund updates. And then under the capital program on page 29, the recommendation for the capital program is to concur with the governor's allowance. Lastly, point out there's an update on page 30 on the status of the Howard Street Tunnel Project, and that will conclude the DLS analysis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quist. And who do we have coming forward on the port? Looks like we have the director of the port and the secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Watson and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Katie Thompson, Acting Secretary of Transportation, and I am joined today by Maryland Port Administration Executive Director Jonathan Daniels. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today to discuss MPA, and thank you again to Sam Quist for his review of the department's budget. Maryland's port continues to play an integral role in maintaining our nation's supply chain and bringing economic opportunity to Maryland. The Howard Street Tunnel Project is ahead of schedule. It's scheduled for completion later this year, and the project reconstructs the tunnel and makes necessary vertical clearance improvements at 22 locations along the CSX Baltimore to Philadelphia rail network. This will create a double-stacked rail corridor for the Port of Baltimore. The project will increase business for the Port of Baltimore by approximately 160 containers annually and create more than 13,000 additional jobs. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, in partnership with the Maryland Port Administration, continues to move forward on the construction of the Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island Ecosystem Restoration Project. This project restores island habitat at the James and Barren Islands and will provide over 35 years of dredge material capacity for our critical shipping challenges. In addition, for the 16th year, MPA's terminals received a top rating of excellent on a security assessment from the U.S. Coast Guard. This is further proof that the Port of Baltimore is not only one of the most productive ports in the U.S., but also among the most secure. Now I'll turn it over to Executive Director Daniels to provide some additional information and address the DLS analysis.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Good afternoon, Chair Watson and members of the committee. For the record, I am Jonathan Daniels, Executive Director of the Maryland Port Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today to discuss MPA and the findings. I'd also like to thank Sam Quest as well for his work with us throughout the year in providing this analysis. In calendar year 2025, the port continued to be ranked among one of the top ports in the nation, finishing first in roll-on, roll-off farm and construction equipment cargo. The port also finished second among all U.S. ports for cars and light trucks, sugar, imported forest products, and imported gypsum. The MPA terminals handled 11.1 million tons of general cargo in 2025, a 36% increase from 2024. Our state-owned and private terminals welcomed a record 2,223 ships in 2025, a 21% increase from 2024. At Seagirt Marine Terminal, the port's dedicated container terminal that's operated by our partners, Ports America Chesapeake, we broke records with more than 1.1 million 20-foot containers and 689 vessel calls. Again, a huge testament to Ports America Chesapeake and our excellent International Longshoremen's Association labor force. Our cruise business continues to be a successful story for Maryland. The Port of Baltimore is home to Carnival and Royal Caribbean, two of the world's largest cruise lines. And just last week, Carnival announced a second ship will sail out of Baltimore for the 27-28 cruise season. Cruises are significant economic generators for Maryland. Every time a cruise ship arrives at our port, it generates over $1 million in economic benefits, which includes spending in our restaurants, hotels, shopping, and entertainment. The MPA's internationally renowned and award-winning dredging program rebuilds long-eroded Chesapeake Bay islands with sediment from port channels, creating new habitats and supporting a diverse array of wildlife, all while ensuring a safe and navigable shipping channel. The importance of dredging and the state's dredge material management program cannot be overstated. In short, it is the lifeline for the Port of Baltimore. And to be clear, it's not just the state-owned piers, but all 33 private terminals and local and regional businesses that benefit from the state's investment in this program. Every year, with help from our partners at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, nearly 5 million cubic yards of sediment are dredged from more than 130 miles of federal navigation channels just to maintain their current depths and widths. The internationally recognized model for the beneficial use of dredge material, the Paul Sarbanes Ecosystem Restoration Project at Poplar Island, is one of our sediment placement sites. To date, the MPA and the Army Corps have restored over 1,700 acres of remote island habitat. Once Poplar reaches its capacity in 2032, our next environmental restoration and mid-Chesapeake Bay Island is on track to be prepared to receive 2 to 3 million cubic yards of material annually. Equally important to MPA is reducing air pollutants at the port and for its surrounding residential communities. Working closely with 6 major private sector maritime partners, the MPA began drawing down funding on a $147 million grant from the U.S. EPA Clean Ports Program, which will support the procurement of 213 new zero-emission vehicles and equipment and charging infrastructure to improve air quality at the port, as well as for our adjacent underserved communities. The port continues to recover from the Key Bridge incident. We have worked hard to bring our cargo back to Baltimore in the time since, and that is an ongoing effort. But it's paramount that we continue to invest in the Port of Baltimore. Our business and tens of thousands of jobs depend on it. We are in constant competition with other U.S. East Coast and Southeast ports to attract business. For example, Virginia is investing $1.4 billion in deepening their channels to 55 feet, which will make them the deepest port on the East Coast. Georgia is implementing a $4.5 billion capital program to significantly grow their container and roll-on, roll-off capacity in direct attempt to take business from other ports, including Baltimore. It's an arms race in every sense of the word. In closing, I am proud to state, however, that the state of our port is strong and resilient. We look forward to continuing to grow as one of Maryland's leading economic engines. We have provided additional budget information to the committee for your reference, as well as a written response to the DLS analysis. I'd like to focus on our response to the DLS analysis right now. DLS requested MPA update and the committee on any significant changes to the amounts of federal reimbursements the agency has received to date. The MPA has no issues receiving federal reimbursements or drawing down disbursements. Additionally, the Dundalk Marine Terminal Berth 11 through 13 Phase 1 reconstruction project is currently under National Environmental Policy Act review, with anticipated completion in April of 2026. We do not anticipate any issues with grant agreement execution. Further, MPA concurs with the DLS recommendations to continue reporting requirements on the Howard Street Tunnel project and updates on our other federal grants. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for comprehensive. It's very good. As you know, Trade Point Atlantic is my district, so Dundalk Marine Terminal is very heartbeat to me, and the port is naturally its border to me. What can I do to assist you to assure that we make Baltimore the #1 port?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's as port directors and port administrators, we're judged by throughput. We're judged by the amount of vessels that call and the amount of cargo that moves across the docks. If our docks are not in good shape, we are in a position where we could lose cargo to these competing ports. It is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are making the proper investments at our public docks to make sure that we are able to maintain our cargo flow. As has been mentioned before, the amount of activity that is going through Seagirt Marine Terminal as we speak, with our great partners from Ports America Chesapeake, under which we have members of that team here. The amount of money that they have invested since our concession has been in place is above $750 million. That's allowed us the opportunity to approach becoming a top 10 container port in the United States. We need your assistance to make sure that we're continuing to make the proper investments throughout our jurisdiction. And as has been mentioned, you have the MPA facilities, but also the 33 private terminals that make up the greater jurisdiction of the Port of Baltimore. You're seeing the type of capacity that's being developed at Trade Point Atlantic. And again, having that in your jurisdiction allows you the opportunity to watch what's going on there. They've been a great partner. We've worked hand in hand with them to make sure that they can move that project forward. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're making the proper investments in our public terminals, those terminals that are currently ongoing, to make sure that we are not losing out on cargo opportunities. It is, as I mentioned, it's an arms race. And the amount of funds that are being invested is absolutely incredible in our competitive market.
I appreciate the answer there. I have to tell you that since I've been a delegate for 12 years, we've been, I hate to say this, use this term, but we've been band-aiding some of the repairs. And I think I've stated this many times, we just need to stop kicking the can and get the job done and do it correctly. But at that same juncture, are we making some progress with the deep water in the Dundalk terminal?
We are berth 11 through 13, and you've heard that the last few years.
Yes.
We continue to move through that into our design and implementation. Again, as I mentioned, we are going through the NEPA process right now to make sure, and then we'll have the grant agreement in place to begin construction in early 2028. Those three berths are in very, very rough shape. A portion of berth 11 was condemned. That's a lot of where this first work is going to occur. It's going to be a project that spans for probably 10 to 12 years, and all of that money invested probably will approach somewhere around $300 million in totality. If we don't do it, though, we lose out on our position, especially on the roll-on, roll-off through those berths. We also are not able to meet our obligations under our lease and contractual obligations.
I'm in your corner, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for being here. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
First, I wanted to ask a little bit about auto shipping. You mentioned that we are second among all ports for cars and light trucks. And I saw in the report that we had an increase in auto tonnage of 43.7% over fiscal year 2023 levels, which all sounds great. And congratulations on that. I just want to understand how that compares to, say, last year as opposed to FY 2023. We've got the sense of, that we're making progress over a couple of years ago, but I'm trying to understand how that is in the context of the moment.
2023 is really our bellwether year. That's when we set records almost across the board. We all know what happened in the morning of March 26th of 2024. What I think it's important to understand, especially with the partners that we do have here representing groups like Ports America Chesapeake, is that while the channel shut down for the majority of that period of time, a lot of the marine work was suspended, the port remained open. The port remained open as what we had access to other ports, other terminals. Trade Point Atlantic saw cargo coming in there, especially on the roll-on, roll-off side of the vehicles that then were brought onto the docks, the public docks, and went through the processing process. So we were able to maintain that, but we did lose out on the marine portion, which definitely led to a decrease in 2024. So what you're seeing, the significant increase over 2024 was the fact that basically we were a 9-month port. So for us to see significant increases over 2024, while that was good because we saw the type of rebound that we were hoping for and were expecting, we really used 2023 as that bellwether. So when we talk about the fact that we did over 1.1 million containers across the dock, that was a record against 2023, which was our previous record. Now 2025 is the one that we can hold up there and say, all right, for 2026, we're pushing to make sure that we best what happened in 2025.
So it's apples to apples as opposed to apples to oranges.
It is. Let's take 2024 out of there, and it's like looking at 2021 on cruise. I'd love to say that coming in 2022 and 2023, we went up thousands of percentage points. We did because we had nothing going on in 2021. Right. So we knew that we were probably going to get above 2024, but the fact that we went and surpassed 2023 for us was just an absolutely fantastic recovery and rebound off of what occurred in 2024.
Yeah, for cruises and cargo, the data seems great, so.
Thank you.
Kudos. I wanted to also ask about federal reimbursements because I just want to make sure the public sort of understands the numbers that are in both the DLS report and your response. So we're seeing a number of federal grant awards in the multi-million dollars, but the amounts received by MPA in reimbursements so far, much smaller. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that in a lot of instances, federal government has approved an award. So let's take, for example, the Clean Ports Program, right? An award of $145.7 million, and we've received federal reimbursements only of about $1 million because we haven't spent the grant money yet, right?
That is. Thank you.
Right.
You
it's authorized.
Answered it for me.
Right. It's authorized,
yes.
And we probably will be spending it, hopefully.
Yes.
But the reason we haven't received the reimbursements is because it's still ongoing as a grant. And I just want to make sure that's clear so people aren't saying, why do we have only $1 million back on a $146 million grant? That's the answer, right?
That is clear. We anticipate in working with our partners as the equipment begins to arrive, is that those payments will increase significantly. We have not had, I think the great part of it, and a lot of the theme last year was asking, are you going to have difficulty in getting reimbursed? We have not as of yet. So those disbursements have been coming through. Staff is processing them after getting those invoices, and we have been receiving those funds in reimbursement.
And just as a general matter, Delegate Spiegel, the same is true across all of our modes and all of our programs. So the federal government, we probably have the most significant discussions with the federal government over the Francis Scott Key Bridge, but for all of our other programs and grants, we are receiving reimbursement in the ordinary course. So we haven't identified any problems, and we hope that we do not.
Well, that is encouraging, and I hope it stays that way. Thank you. And then my final question is, I just wanted to ask for a status update on North Locust Points Terminal.
We continue to work through, as many people know, there have been some difficulties with the condition of that pier itself. We have done engineering surveys to make sure that we are not putting in a position where there could be further damage or whether it is unsafe. We actually completed earlier last year an engineering survey and found a way in order to allow us the opportunity to be able to keep it open for a period of time to allow for product to move through there. Primarily, the concern was making sure that salt would be able to move through there. We've had several meetings with the existing contractor and terminal operator. We have extended their current agreement through the end of 2029. But I want to make sure that within the provisions of that, every year we will be doing an additional survey to make sure that the condition of the pier does not put anything in harm's way. So we will continue to do that. We have one scheduled for October through December of this year, and we are trying to find financial resources to be able to rehabilitate the pier. So we are looking at options to be able to maintain the entirety of that terminal and primarily the marine access. But we have found a way to be able to maintain that. The original agreement had that pier closing at the end of 2025. So we're now able to keep it going for an additional 5 years.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And that was an additional 5 years with the possibility of doing more improvements on that pier and keeping it open beyond that. So that sounds like a reasonable approach. Would you please explain the deficiency appropriation in this year's budget?
The $618,000 associated with that?
Yes. It has something to do with software licenses.
Yes. So that would have been additional funds necessary for the obligation that we have for maintaining our licenses for our software. Significant amount of work that we do, whether it's down on the terminals or up in the administration themselves. A lot of that has to do with cybersecurity activity associated with maintaining our responsibilities under Department of Homeland Security and our Coast Guard regulations.
So this was to maintain the licenses?
This was...
Or to renew the licenses?
Additional licenses. Thank you. Additional licenses.
Okay. What we're trying to understand is why it was a deficiency appropriation as opposed to something that you knew about and budgeted for.
That I would have to get, I'll get that because there's been a changeover in the way in which we're accommodating our IT. So we'll get more information for you.
If there's someone here, if you have someone here and they want to come up and explain it, that's fine too.
Yeah, Jacqueline.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Jacqueline Hartman, Assistant Secretary of Transportation Investments. The deficiency was there was a true up with one of our software vendors where we thought we had sufficient licenses across the department. However, after a yearly or annual reconciliation that they do, they found that we accessed the system more than the number of licenses we had, and so there was additional license needed to kind of true that amount up.
Okay, so you had more people than using the system than you had licenses for, and you, the port, weren't aware of that.
Sure.
Yes, so
and then an audit, so to speak, by the vendor showed that you had more people using it than you had licenses for, therefore you owed them funding for additional licensing.
So it is essentially concurrent licenses across the entire department so that we are allowed to access the system. It's not necessarily per user who can access the system at any one time.
But they charge you more per the number of people.
But yeah, so essentially we had more people tapping into the system at any given time, and that increased the price of these, or the number of licenses needed.
When did you become aware of that liability?
Within the past 6 months, roughly.
Okay. So why wasn't it a budget amendment as opposed to a deficiency appropriation?
We were still going through the process to figure out exactly what that amount needed to be. This will actually be going to the Board of Public Works, I believe, on Wednesday as well. So there is a contractual issue as well that we need to bring up the amount of contract authority available. So we were kind of right at the cutoff time of when we're allowed to do budget amendments versus deficiencies.
What is the cutoff time for budget amendments?
Roughly the end of November, where once you start getting close to session, DBM prefers that things come through as deficiencies so they can be brought forward to the legislature rather than going through the normal budget amendment process.
Okay. When you do and this is the last question, I promise. Thank you for just jumping in and answering them. When you do this is not directed completely at you, but we are seeing more and more deficiency appropriations. And obviously, when you have that, it makes it very difficult to, meet your budget. And then you're bringing these former liabilities into future years. And so we really prefer not to see deficiency appropriations. And so we want to understand the process that you go through. Mm-hmm. When you do a budget amendment, you provide a pretty good explanation and rationale for the amendment to DLS, and they review it. They make a recommendation to us. We decide whether or not we're going to approve it, and that happens mid-year. Yeah. When you do a deficiency appropriation or request that, who gets the explanation and rationale? Do you do a similar process as you do for the budget amendment when you're doing a deficiency appropriation? And where does that information go?
To some degree, yes, it's a very similar process. So each of the deficiencies ends up in the back of the budget bill listed. There is an explanation that goes over to DLS that's still similar to what we do for budget amendments as well. They see the amount, and then in a budget amendment, we would also have to show where the money is coming to fund for that budget amendment. Since this is located in the budget bill, where also, the budget bill has to be balanced, and we do that same process with deficiencies as well. So we are adjusting the budget as well as the funding available for the department to ensure that there's sufficient money available.
And so the difference between an amendment and a deficiency is timing?
Mostly timing and kind of where they end up in the process. They separate a budget amendment that you all receive during the interim versus being shown in the budget bill itself and being here as part of the budget hearing process.
But that's a result of when you discover the problem.
Correct, yes.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments from our other two panelists on this?
No.
No.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, Ms. Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. I think you addressed this, but have you seen, has the port pretty much recovered since, we had the issue with COVID, and then we had, and we recovered a little bit. And then we had the unfortunate issue with the Key Bridge. Are you starting to see recovery with cargo shipments? Are we getting back up to speed, so to say?
We are, and I think we've been a little bit quicker in some areas than we anticipated. Part of that had to deal with some of the additional services that were coming across the container dock at Seagirt, going from an average of 12 vessel calls a week to 15. Allowed us the opportunity to see some additional cargo come through. Unfortunately, what we're not seeing the amount of cargo and the utilization of the vessels to the extent that we've seen in the past. So we're seeing more vessels come in, but you're seeing less cargo per vessel. That still allowed us the opportunity to beat the record for vessel calls to the dock, as well, as well as overall cargo records. But we certainly would love to be able to see the amount of cargo go up per ship. And I think that's more on a macro global issue of where everything from tariffs to timing of tariffs are coming in. It was facilitated during the year. We had a very strong first quarter of 2025. Then it kind of waned off a little bit going through the rest of the year. Just not ultimately knowing the consistency or lack thereof of the tariff program that was coming from the administration.
Thank you.
Committee members, any further questions? Okay, well, we thank you very much
Thank you.
Director and Madam Secretary. And now we do not have any witnesses for your budget, but we will move on to the Maryland Aviation Administration. And our DLS analyst is Kelly Norton, and she will provide us with an analysis, and then we'll have your response. Ms. Norton, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to begin with page 1, where we have the operating budget summary. The budget for fiscal 2027 increases to $270 million, a 4.2% increase compared to fiscal 2026. The pay-go capital budget summary on page 2 is incorrect and does not include other funds, which are made up of passenger facility charge revenue and special transportation revenue bonds. The correct chart can be seen on the handouts. The fiscal 2027 allowance decreases to $273 million, or 16.7% from fiscal 2026. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows the total passengers at BWI from calendar 2016 to 2025. The airport has continued to outperform the lows of the pandemic era, increasing from 2021 to 2024. There was a 6.9% decrease in 2025, most likely due to the reduction of flights in November from the government shutdown. On page 6 is Exhibit 2, showing the passenger market share for BWI, Dulles Airport, and Reagan Airport. In fiscal 2025, BWI's market share decreased to 32.5% from 34.1% in the previous year. Dulles Airport had the largest market share with 35.7%. An important financial calculation considered by airplanes when deciding where to fly is the cost per enplaned passenger, or CPE, at a given airport. CPE costs are the total of terminal and airfield costs related to flight activities, which are paid by the airport and subsequently reimbursed by the airlines. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the CPE for the 3 airports. BWI's estimated CPE increases to $11.57 in fiscal 2025. This increase is not surprising due to the decline in deployments. BWI is expected to have the highest CPE in the region for fiscal 2025. The fiscal 2027 budget includes a proposed deficiency appropriation of $6.5 million in special funds to provide additional funding for snow removal. The Maryland Aviation Administration has been awarded one discretionary grant in the past calendar year under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, totaling $1 million from FAA's Airport Terminal Program to continue work on its replacement of Martin State Airport's Air Traffic Control Tower. Exhibit 4 on page 9 shows the overview of agency spending in fiscal 2027. BWI comprises 96% of the operating budget. Exhibit 5 on page 10 has a proposed budget and provides a breakdown of the areas of growth between fiscal 2026 and 2027. Fiscal 2027 increased $10.9 million over the fiscal 2026 working appropriation. Personnel expenses account for a $3.8 million increase from fiscal 2026 to 2027, with the largest portion being $2.2 million for employee and retiree health insurance. Other significant changes are $2.1 million for the airport shuttle and van services at BWI, $2.2 million for insurance, and $1.4 million for fuel and utilities. Moving to the operating revenues generated through flight activities, concessions, and other operations at BWI and Martin State Airport, Exhibit 6 on pages 11 and 12 shows the special fund revenues and expenditures for MAA from fiscal 2025 through 2027. Operating revenues cover operating expenditures over this period and most capital expenses. Personnel data can be found on page 13. Regular positions decreased by 14 from the fiscal 2026 working appropriation. These positions were transferred to the Secretary's office as part of MDOT's effort to consolidate IT operations. MAA had 12 more vacancies in December 2025 than at the same time in the previous year, an increase from 36.3 to 48.3, or 33%, due to the hiring freeze in hard-to-fill positions. Looking to the 2026 Consolidated Transportation Program, or CTP, Exhibit 7 on page 14 shows the 6-year program capital spending from fiscal 2026 to 2021. The 6-year total is roughly $958 million, with nearly 48% going towards system preservation and 35% for expansion in efficiency projects. On the next page, Exhibit 8 provides the list of projects in fiscal 2027. The fiscal 2027 allowance is $273 million. The largest project planned for fiscal 2027 is the Runway 1028 Rehabilitation Project with $75.7 million, followed by the Passenger Movement Modernization Project at $36.5 million. Exhibit 9 on page 17 has the capital cash flow changes from fiscal 2026 to 2027. Fiscal 2026 has increased $5.8 million since last year's CTP to $328 million. And fiscal 2027 will decrease $55 million compared to the working appropriation. Exhibit 10 on pages 18 through 19 shows the cash flow changes from the fiscal 2026 allowance to the fiscal 2026 working appropriation. As you can see, the cost of major construction projects decreased $20.1 million, and the development evaluation program decreased $4.9 million. These decreases were offset by the $29.7 million increase in the minor program and the $1.1 million increase in salaries and wages. Exhibit 11 on pages 20 through 21 shows the breakdown of the cash flow changes from fiscal 26 working appropriation to the fiscal 2027 allowance. Major construction decreases $47 million, and the minor program decreases $28 million. The development and evaluation program increases $20 million, leading to an overall decrease of nearly $55 million in fiscal 2027. Exhibit 12 on page 22 shows the percentage of first-year funding and ongoing funding in fiscal 2027. Ongoing funding is $214 million, or 78% of the allowance, and first-year funding accounts for $59 million, or 22%. Exhibit 13 shows the breakdown of the first-year funding for fiscal 2026 and 2027. There is $14 million of first-year funding for fiscal 2026 and $59 million for fiscal 2027. Exhibit 14 on page 24 shows the major changes from the last CTP. 2 projects were added, the North Cargo Pavement Rehabilitation and Runway 15R/33L Pavement Mill and Overlay projects at BWI for a total cost of $49 million. On page 25 are the recommended actions, and they are to concur with the governor's allowance for the operating and pay-go budgets. An update on BWI Marshall Airport concession contract is on page 26, and this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Norton. And we have the executive director with us, and we have the MDOT secretary with us. And who would like to begin?
I will begin. For the record, I'm Katie Thompson, Acting Secretary of Transportation. I'm joined here this afternoon by Shanetta Griffin, Executive Director of the Maryland Aviation Administration, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify today. We want to thank Kelly Norton for her review of the department's budget. Importantly, the Maryland aviation system serves as a critical engine for economic prosperity, global connectivity, and public safety. I want to acknowledge Executive Director Griffin and her team at the MAA for leading BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport and Martin State Airport, and for supporting public use airports across the state of Maryland. She will provide additional details, but the MAA team is working to advance important capital projects that will improve BWI Marshall and Martin State airports for our customers and passengers and ensure modern, efficient facilities for our partners. On day 2 of my role as acting secretary, I was proud to be able to join the MAA team along with Governor Moore, Southwest Airlines leadership, and other stakeholders to celebrate the opening of the Concourse AB Connector and Baggage Handling System project, a major investment in the future of BWI Marshall Airport. This project, among other projects, will shape the future of the airport for decades to come. We are also working hard to modernize and enhance our other aviation jewel, Martin State Airport, including an important project to construct a new air traffic control facility. Now, Executive Director Griffin will provide additional information and address the DLS analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Secretary. Good afternoon, Chair Watson and members of the committee. For the record, I am Shanetta Griffin, Executive Director and CEO of the Maryland Aviation Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss MAA's fiscal year 2027 budget request. I also want to thank Kelly Norton for her work with us throughout the year. The Maryland aviation system plays a critical role in supporting travel, tourism, and economic development. Baltimore, Washington International, Thurgood Marshall Airport, Martin State Airport, and public use airports across Maryland serve the aviation needs of residents, businesses, and visitors. BWI Marshall Airport is the state's key gateway for domestic and international travel, along with major cargo operations. The airport produces an annual income impact of $11.3 billion while creating and supporting more than 107,000 jobs throughout the region. BWI Marshall remains the busiest airport for cargo operations in the region. Passenger traffic dipped the last fiscal year at BWI Marshall, and we expect a similar result this fiscal year. Airline industry challenges, including limited aircraft availability and bankruptcies, along with economic pressures and a lengthy federal government shutdown, affected travel. We anticipate growth to return in fiscal year 2027. In our capital program, we continue to advance important projects that will improve BWI Marshall and Martin State airports for our customers while providing critical facilities with additional capacity for our airline partners and other stakeholders. Acting Secretary Thompson mentioned, for example, that we opened the Concourse A-B Connector and Baggage Handling Project in January, a major multi-year capital improvement. While the entire program of work will conclude this summer, many components are now open to the benefit of our passengers and our largest carrier, Southwest Airlines. Another project to support Southwest Airlines, their new airline maintenance facility, was opened last summer. This is the first Southwest maintenance hangar in this part of the country. Other facilities and airfield projects were completed as well. At Martin State, we broke ground last year on the project to build a new state-of-the-art air traffic control tower. The work will replace the current facility, which is more than 80 years old. Going forward, the MA's 6-year capital program totals $950 million for BWI Marshall, Martin State, and the regional aviation airport support. The program includes over $450 million for critical state of good repair projects, including BWI Marshall runway, taxiway, and apron pavement rehabilitation projects. I want to acknowledge and thank the Maryland General Assembly, along with the Moore-Miller administration, for the critical transportation investments that were approved last year. The MA received $25 million in additional transportation trust fund investments for important capital improvements that will improve safety and preserve our aviation system. An important example of this investment is the major runway rehabilitation project at BWI Marshall Airport that will kick off this summer. This project is receiving nearly $17 million in TTF funding, which allowed us to leverage more than $57 million in Federal Aviation Administration funding for the project. The work will resurface the entire length of one of our primary commercial runways and the intersection with another critical secondary primary runway. This important project is being closely coordinated with our airline partners. I also want to emphasize that throughout our capital program, we work to maximize federal funding opportunities. 27% of our 6-year capital program currently is funded with federal dollars, totaling more than $259 million. I appreciate this opportunity to brief the committee today. Thank you for your continued support and guidance. At the MAA, we are prepared for continued success. I am extremely proud of the good work and dedication by our team to support aviation across the state of Maryland, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, and thank you for that report, and thank you to you and your staff for all that you do, to facilitate moving cargo and passengers, and we appreciate you. We also appreciate all of the TSA workers who went without paychecks this year. Last year and currently?
Yeah, I think
currently,
with
yes, government shutdown, who stay on the job to do their job every day. It's really remarkable. So we appreciate all of that. Please pass that on to your staff. And we will start with Delegate Metzger.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to meeting you. I was at the Calvert House the other night, and I must have slipped out and you slipped in. So, I'm in Martin's area. the Glen O. Martin Museum. And I'm very familiar with what's going on, taking place there. It's going to be the greatest museum on the East Coast of aerospace, rocket labs, and so forth. Question I have is this actually, a couple of questions, really. Are the runway still plans to go at Martin's, the runway extension?
So that is still in the planning stages. Funding is the key there. So we have the obstructions that we're clearing on the end of that runway, which involves Amtrak and some tree clearing, those types of things. So that is still in the planning process. We did submit a grant, I believe, to the Department of Defense. I don't believe that we received that grant because of the change out of the National Guard and their program. So again, we're continuing to work with the Federal Aviation Administration on trying to get funding there, but we do have to do the obstruction clearance first.
The reason why I ask is, we've lost our B-17, our planes, and we're trying to get something back. I don't know if it's going to come back or not. So that's why I was curious if that was still on target.
Well, it is my understanding, too, that they are looking to try and get another flight, but it probably won't be till 27, 28.
Right.
But again, that runway would be critical.
That would be
for
prepared.
This.
That way you can be prepared. I understand.
Yes, indeed.
Totally. The other question I had was, I was looking through here, Madam Chair, if you just indulge me, at budget changes, and I saw somewhere where there was like an $853,000 overtime charge somewhere that was expecting to happen. I misplaced my page, ma'am.
Let's take your time.
I normally had that. Give me a second or two. Anyway, it was proposed changes. It was $800 and some thousand. Are you expecting that much overtime, or is that just a number that had to be flying through or something?
Okay, Delegate. Thank you for the question, Delegate. I have brought forth my Deputy Chief of Finance, Dan Favarolo, so he will be able to address your question.
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. That $855,000 that you see there was a budget realignment where we took some money from other objects and moved it into overtime to cover the building maintenance and ground maintenance overtime costs that were not sufficiently budgeted based off of 5-year historical averages.
And then another question we thought of earlier was for snow removal of $6-some million. Was that for this year or last year?
So that 6.4 was part of the deficiency amendment to cover snow removal costs that we did not have budgeted this year. But part of the additional funds in 27 were also to cover some snow removal costs as well.
So it's for this year?
Well, it starts this year with the deficiency amendment, and then in 27, it's included in the budget.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Delegate Spiegel.
So following up on that deficiency question, I just wanted to ask about the proposed deficiency for the snow plow. We're trying to figure out the timing of the need, if this is related to the recent snowcrete incident or if this is snow plowing needs from long before that. Because I guess technically the snowcrete incident, although very recent, is before fiscal year 2027 begins, of course.
Yeah, so that 6.4 million that's part of the deficiency amendment was, we did not carry a snow budget for the last 3 years. Basically coming out of COVID, we did not have a snow budget. Now, we were very fortunate that snow costs were not very high over the last couple of years. But we knew last year we had a high snow cost, and then going into this year, we wanted to make sure we had sufficient funds, and I'm glad we did, because just that last snowstorm cost us almost $5 million to keep the airport open. So it was as a result of not having sufficient funds in the budget to support snow removal costs that was added. So it wasn't related to any specific snow event, more being prepared for a future.
Thank you for that answer. I'm just, how is it that the airport would have no snow budget in any given year?
That's a good question. Before my predecessors were there.
Was that, I mean, that was a long-standing practice, or that was just a few years, or?
I think it was more coming out of COVID with very tight budget constraints. there wasn't a necessary need to always budget for things that you didn't know were going to happen or not. And so you kind of tackle those things as they occurred. And very fortunate the first, couple of years, snow was not a big expense. So we were able to kind of manage it within the budget. However, that's quickly changing as the climate's changing, and we realized we needed to properly budget for those expenses. But I think.
Okay,
Jacqueline might
so,
wanna speak as
so
well.
let's go back to your answer about the 6.5 million. Do you have a breakdown of that 6.5 million and to which years it's being allocated?
So the 6.5 million is the last 5-year average. So it's the last 5 years, and we just took the average of what our snow expenses were over those 5-year period.
So how did we pay for the last 5 years of expenses if it wasn't in the budget?
So we would find cost savings to mitigate those expenses, or we would come in over budget
And ask for a budget amendment?
at the end of the year, yes.
Or a deficiency?
Yes.
Okay, so this year, you're taking a different approach. And when did you decide to put in for the budget deficiency?
So that would have been probably right around July-ish.
Right, so as part of the, Jacqueline Hartman, Assistant Secretary of Transportation Investments, for the record. So as part of the request process, when we were looking towards building our fiscal 27 budget, we also review our fiscal 26, our current budget, to see if there are no needs that we do not have sufficient funding for. And that is when we identified the need to add funding. We can double check. I thought there was some funding in there for snow already. It was insufficient, but I believe there were funds budgeted already.
In what year?
In every year. So there is some amount budgeted every year. There are years when we have bad snowstorms where the amounts go, we end up needing more than what we have available. I think snow removal is always a tricky expense because you never know how winter is going to be. And so what we have done, like on the State Highway Administration side, is that we use a moving 5-year average so that whatever the expenses over the last 5 years have been, that is what we budget in the upcoming year. That's what we've now moved the Maryland Aviation Administration to as well, so that we have that rolling 5-year average as our guide to what should be in the budget. Unfortunately, with snow removal, it's going to be the wrong number every year, just given not knowing how the winter is going to form.
So thank you for that. We understand how it works in SHA because we always try to take that money that they don't use for the snow removal if they over budget. But you're saying you don't think that your agency has operated in the same way, or you're not sure how much was budgeted in the past for snow removal, but now you want to move to a 5-year average? Okay.
Correct, yes.
So in moving to a 5-year average, why didn't we do that when we formed the budget last year? I mean, why are we doing it now backwards? Why are we doing that?
Right. I think part of it was also just the timing of, thank you to the legislature's actions and Governor Moore, we are coming off of 2 years of transportation revenue increases, and that does allow us to take a look back at some of our budget to see some of the areas that perhaps were underfunded and ensure that we have sufficient funding in those areas moving forward. So some of what you're seeing come in as deficiencies this year from MDOT is really making sure that we're taking the full view of our budget, and then we're going to have sufficient funding budgeted to fulfill all of our needs.
Okay, so to repeat, that the $6.5 million is not a hard estimate of what you think you will need for the specifics of this year, but it is a 5-year average that you're basically throwing in now to pay for in the budget that we've already approved.
Correct, yes.
Okay, so is there any way to get a better estimate than the 6.5 million since we're already in the year where you are spending the money?
So if you ask me right now, we spent $6.1 million on snow expenses. So
okay, and from what month to when?
From July 1st to now.
Okay, but that includes the last 3 weeks?
Yes, it does, yes.
Okay, but I just want to make the point that you asked for 6.5 million before you knew about the last 3 weeks.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. And so are you sure that 6.5 million is enough?
No.
Okay. Would you mind providing to the committee a report on, or a one-pager on the 6.5 million, how you got that number, what your expenses are for the current fiscal year, and how you plan to budget for snow removal going forward? Sure. That would be helpful. Thank you. Other questions? And again, I think you heard us ask the same question of a previous agency. We just really need to get a handle on budget deficiencies, budget amendments, particularly in this time of very fiscally tight budgets and constraints. When I don't want to use the word throw, but when you throw something in here at the last minute like this, it affects everything. So we want to be a lot tighter with how we're asking for budget amendments and budget deficiencies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will.
I don't think I have to say anything more about deficiencies. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the assist. So I wanted to also ask about the concession contract. I know there's been a winding history of the procurement of the concession contract, but it's now in place. And now that it's sort of ready to be up and running, we have this development with the Federal Department of Transportation in terms of the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. Is that impacting the ability of the concessionaire to move forward with their plans under the contract as awarded? What's the current status?
So not in regards to it's the ACDB program that the federal government has decertified all those vendors. So they are still moving forward with the program. Through that interim final rule, we can't regulate it, we can't track it, any of those types of things. But the vendor did propose in their proposal a certain percentage, and we're still following that. Again, not doing all the monitoring and everything. We're still following that to make sure that they adhere to the pieces of their proposal and in the contract.
Okay, thank you. And then I wanted to ask about slightly reduced passenger share and raw numbers of passenger throughput and the increase in the CPE that was mentioned. I'm wondering if you have a sense how much of that might be due to the federal government shutdown in November and the FAA directed reductions in service at BWI versus taxiway construction projects that might have impacted those numbers versus I understand Southwest aircraft delivery have been delayed, all these different factors. Does the agency have a sense as to what were the biggest driving factors to those number changes?
So thank you for the question, Delegate. So yes, it's really a combination of all of the above. Southwest is changing their business model, and so we're seeing some of that where the airport is considered to be an origination and destination airport. As they are changing that business model, we're starting to see more transfer passengers. So those transfer passengers aren't necessarily coming from the community, but they're in the airport and then they fly out. Their delivery of aircraft, not just them, but every airline certainly is having that impact on delivery of aircraft. So they do fluctuation in the aircraft that they have. They may go to a larger aircraft, they may go to a small aircraft to be able to accommodate the passengers that they do have. Also, it is a common factor that everyone knows that Spirit Airlines is going through bankruptcy. They were our #2 airline for a long period of time. That fluctuation has also occurred as well too. And then again, as you mentioned, our airfield, we have intersecting runways. And so the emergencies that we sometimes have to have, we just had one recently where we had to close the airport while we repaired that intersection. That's why this Project 1028 is very, very critical to be able to go in and do a state of good repair on that runway. And then the last piece of that too is when it comes to, again, when we look at all of those factors together, that is driving air service and what that looks like. And it's fluctuating. Airlines decide, they're going to keep a flight, they're going to change a flight, and we're monitoring that and working that considerably to make sure we understand where those fluctuations are, when they're going to be. The CPE that you mentioned has a big driver of that. the piece of that that really controls that CPE is the number of passengers. So as that number continues to go down, our CPE goes up. As we're doing, state of good repair or whatever capital projects that we're doing, that number will continue to fluctuate as well. So again, 2027, we're hoping that we'll see those passengers, the numbers increase, which will take our CPE to a more relative level. Compared to our other airports in the region, I think we're still in a very good place when it comes to CPE. Some of the other airports have different parameters around how they control their cost and what those costs look like. And so that's why sometimes it's not comparing apples to apples in that regards. But again, we'll still be in a very good place with our CPE.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from my members? Okay, let me just check our list here very quickly. I think you've answered all of our questions. We will follow up with you on the couple of things that we raised. And again, we do appreciate your efforts and that of your staff, and please take that back. And we will close the hearing now and see you next time, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you.